just briefly going back to a permanent move, and it's one which has been, maybe in Ecuador, a transfer saga, but has been purported that he was interesting a number of clubs. Brighton were always sort of at the forefront. I'm saying that Taylor Harwood-Bellis, that was a smart move to Blackburn for probably many parties involved there. But talking of smart moves, Brighton are never too far from the conversation, and they've signed Moisés Caicedo from Independiente del Valle in Ecuador. And as your left field transfer of the January window, I think this is very much up there. But it's one that makes a lot of sense. And in Brighton's trouble to find the back of the net this season, they have signed a player who can find the back of the net from range. And Sam, he is vehemently in your yes column, so I'm gonna leave the floor to you on Moisés Caicedo.
Yeah, very weird, isn't it? I mean, go back five years or something like that when Brighton were back in the Championship, and you say to someone, "Hey, in 5 years' time, you're going to be a Premier League side, and you're going to be signing highly rated, like as in highly rated, as in talked about as the best midfielder coming out of South America who is 20 years of age or younger. You're going to be signing those players for £4.5 million. They're going to come to play on the Playa del Brighton. I mean, that is just there's a Latin South American influence at Brighton at the moment, and this kind of fits in with that. In fact, to be fair, you take a look at their under 23s and reserves and loan list. They do scour the world, don't they? It goes under the radar a little bit, but there's so many players on their books that you look at and think, oh, that's interesting. Oh, how have they spotted that? Oh, and Moisés Caicedo, they've basically just had to play the waiting game for, haven't they? They waited most of December and all of January, and on the final day, they got their man. There was a really good piece from Rory Smith in the New York Times about how the complications over the deals and the sheer number of agents and demands that Caicedo had basically just put everybody off. And Brighton just kind of sat there and went, we'll take you if you want us. And they just waited like 50 days. and then finally at the end of the window, they went, yeah, go on then, we'll sign you. So £4.5 million, one of the themes running through a lot of these transfers, particularly with someone like Kabak, is there's very little risk attached to these deals. And with Caicedo for £4.5 million, there's just very little risk. It's the kind of transfer that would not have been able to happen last January, I think, but because of the new regulations in place post-Brexit, he actually qualifies in a way that he didn't used to. And this opens up a whole world of transfers for Premier League teams. And I think a lot of teams would have looked at this transfer and gone, we could sign players from Ecuador. Interesting. Didn't know we could do that. And Caicedo, to be fair, shouldn't be that much of a secret because he's a full Ecuador international. And all right, it's not the greatest South American qualifying team, but it's an up-and-coming one. It's a developing one. It's got a nice young cluster of players. Ecuador have been sensational at youth level for the last 2 or 3 years. Interestingly, though, Joe, I know you've probably watched this as well. I've seen Ecuador play under 18, under 20 level. I saw them at the World Cup. I saw them at the South American qualifiers. I do not remember watching Moisés Caicedo play for these teams. Have I gone mad, or was he not there?
No, I haven't. I don't recall seeing him either. It's the Under 20 World Cup. Unless I've overlooked him massively, I do not remember seeing him at those tournaments.
No.
But it's one that's come on very, very fast, hasn't it? And on that, the Brexit point, it's quite interesting because, it is through his appearances in, I can't remember if it's either the Copa Sudamericana, which is the South American Europa League, or the Libertadores, which is the big one. His appearances for Independiente del Valle in that competition, which obviously will have earned him quite a lot of points in the new Brexit transfer system, which means that you have to have 15 points to qualify for a work permit, essentially, in the post-Brexit UK. And if it's something like, if you have 10 points, between 10 and 15, you can apply for sort of special dispensation, and then it'll go to a panel or something like that. I think Caicedo passed that test, so to speak. And yeah, 4.5 million, it's low risk. It's really low risk. Brighton make, 20 times that in their TV revenue for 1 year. Moisés Caicedo, it's almost absolutely certain, if he plays a decent amount of football at Brighton over the next 2.5 years, he will obviously move on for much more than that. Because as much as we like Brighton's recruitment and the structure and Tony Bloom, what he's got going on there, they are more of a, they're a selling club, so to speak, because they will have to offload some of their best players if they do sort of hit the heights. We've seen that already with the links to Yves Bissouma, being linked to Arsenal and such. So Moisés Caicedo perhaps could be sort of that replacement if Bissouma were to move on. He's got that box-to-box presence. I think obviously the step up at first will be a little bit difficult for him, but that's why you bring in a player to replace another before that player has actually left, if that makes sense and isn't all too convoluted.
Yeah, it's a continuation policy. It's basically what we've been talking about with Kouadio Kone, and we hope that he'll be able to play in the same midfield as Dennis Zakaria. There's every chance that doesn't happen, and he is the new Dennis Zakaria. And if that's the case, then fair enough. It's smart scouting. It's the continuation. It's the preservation policy. It's the sort of thing that basically every club in this world needs to do, other than Real Madrid and Barcelona and maybe Man United. Like, every club's a selling club except for like 3. That's just the cold, hard reality of it. So well done to Brighton for identifying him. Although, to be fair, like, as a fully fledged Ecuador international and an undroppable piece of a new young Ecuador side, he's not the biggest secret in the world, but it's still a plunge. You're still taking a player from the Ecuadorian league. Like, it's not the most obvious thing to do in the world. No way. So well done to them. And I think, again, similar to Kone, he's a box-to-box player. He's got good athleticism. I don't think he's an outstanding athlete, and I think his positional aptitude and his intelligence and his awareness of what's going on around him does shine through a little bit more than the kind of explosiveness that you'd expect. But I do think he's also that kind of candidate like Kone, where if you wanted to give him 6 to 12 months of tutelage, I think he could actually become a very, very good, more disciplined midfielder, much more of a number 6 than a number 8. So he's multiple putty in the hands of Graham Potter. He can do what he wants with him. He can learn from Bissouma for the next 6 months. I think I'm right in saying he hasn't played a game since mid-December. So he's 6 weeks behind, Jesus, on fitness. It's been a long year. 6 weeks behind on fitness, and he's a 19-year-old adapting to a new culture. I know Brighton have a beach, but it's not that similar to Ecuador, trust me. So we're not going to see much of him, but that's okay. He can take his time and he can adapt. And I think they've picked up quite a special player here for zero risk. I did actually learn 2 quite cool things about Moisés Caicedo that I already said on the Ranks FC podcast, but in case you haven't heard. One, apparently he's like exceptional at maths, right? Which, to be fair, for any footballer,
that's pretty cool.
Is pretty rare. He's also one of 10 brothers.
10? And they're all brothers?
They're all brothers.
I mean, it's a good job he's good at maths, because he's going to need to count, isn't he?
Well, as to say, I mean, that's probably why he got so good at maths. Had to count his brothers all the time. Anyway, just little nuggets there. I picked those up in an article from Tom Robinson, who I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm sure scouted football followers are as well. Someone who covers South America extremely well.
Yeah, there's certainly the scope for a Netflix mini series of Alexis McAllister, Moisés Caicedo, and Steven Alzate's sort of a South American trio at Brighton, sort of with the culture and everything.